Welcome to today's Energy Central Power Session entitled Leveraging Customer Data to Impact Customer Behavioral Changes. A few housekeeping notes we'd like to mention. We acknowledge that given the higher demands on internet connections where many are working from home, technical issues may be more pronounced. If for any reason we find the need to restart the event, we invite you to click your same link to rejoin us. If you cannot get adequate sound from your computer speakers, you may dial into the audio portion using the telephone number listed in the right-hand panel of your interface under the audio section. We will be pausing throughout the presentation for questions. Along the way, please, if you think of anything, enter those into your interface at any time, and we'll be able to incorporate them into the discussion as soon as possible. Before we jump in, we absolutely want to extend a special thanks to our sponsor, Salesforce, for making today's event possible. Salesforce is the #1 CRM for energy and utility companies. They help utilities personalize and digitalize customer engagements. They drive customer acquisition, accelerate time to value, and reduce risk, all on a flexible and scalable platform. And we certainly want to thank our partner, Utility 2030, for helping to pull everything together. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Vanessa Edmonds to kick things off. Vanessa, over to you.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Edmonds, and I'm really happy to be here with you today. I'm the Executive Director of the Utility 2030 Collaborative. I'm actually calling in from Nashville today, so I'm really excited to be here. If you haven't been to Nashville, it's a great city. So today we're going to be talking about data. Data, as we know, is a powerful tool for understanding customers and creating tailored experiences to meet their exact needs. That we know. What we may not know are some of the new uses of customer data being leveraged by utilities that our panelists are going to share with us today. So please stay on for the entire webinar. There's going to be some pretty exciting information that they're going to share with you. But before we start with that, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Rupali Shah. She's with SMUD. Rupali, hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Rupali Shah. I'm the Manager of Business Performance and Optimization at SMUD. The core work for our team is really on data analytics and market segmentation and developing customer-centric market segment plans. I've been at SMUD for about 8 years, and prior to that, worked pretty extensively in the healthcare space in marketing, strategic planning, and consulting.
Thank you. It's so nice to have you on today's call. Next, I would like to introduce you to my friend, Susan Norris. Susan's calling in from the San Francisco area. Susan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me, Energy Central, and Vanessa, thanks for hosting. I have been working in this industry for almost 30 years, or maybe even longer. I started when I was 12, so I don't have to date myself. I've mostly been working in implementing innovative solutions to really help overcome some of these gnarly problems within utilities generally. Before in an implementer, now at Salesforce. I'm currently focusing on helping utilities strategically disrupt, if that makes sense, or just break out of that inertia and think about their digital transformation and how they are engaging not only their employees, but their customers in a very different way using technology.
Thank you. Well, we're really happy to have you here today, and I know you've got some fun data and information to share with us. Last but certainly not least, we have James Riley on the phone. He is with Utility 2030. He is my partner in crime, literally, except not the crime part. James, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to be on the call. Star sign Libra, favorite color blue. Oh, wait, that's the wrong call. About 30 years in the consulting industry, during which I've worked across most industries. And that I found very valuable in seeing how different industries deal with customers. Last 15 years or so, very much focused on the utility industry here in North America and looking at how we deliver a better customer experience and how we use technology to enable that. I think it's probably fair to say that I'm very much an advocate for thinking from a customer's perspective and have probably described myself as a fanboy of customer experience. So very happy and very excited to be on the call.
Well, thank you, James, for joining us. So today I want to start by mentioning a white paper, and it was published by the Harvard Business Review, and it was actually sponsored by Salesforce. I highly recommend that you download it. It's called Improving the Customer Experience in the Utilities Industry. And I want to read a direct quote from that paper, and then we're going to get into some feedback on that quote from the panelists. So the quote in the paper says, since smart meters and the Internet of Things has kicked off a utility data revolution, power and utility companies have worked to use this data to change the nature of customer relationships. With early emphasis on usage, control and conversation, most utilities have steadily shifted to a more customer-centric model over the past decade. But as we know, what's really leading what these new customer-centric models look like are customers, our customers, and they are changing. And so we want to talk a little bit about what those changes are looking like today, and even how we expect them to change further in the future. And we are going to start off that really just addressing that question. James, do you want to be the first one to speak to that?
Sure, happy to. So this question has been bothering me quite a lot recently, so thank you so much for making it the first question. And it's been bothering me because for a long time I've been talking about how customer expectations have started to shift to being set by their experiences outside of the utility industry. And even the paper itself, it talks about that specifically, the Netflixes, the Amazons, the Ubers of this world. And I'm still convinced that great customer experience outside of the utility industry is shifting customer expectations around what they expect from their utilities. And I think we'll kind of probably talk a little bit later about the slow evolution in thinking from a utility perspective. But kind of coupled with that, the utility industry in many respects is fairly unique in the sense that the services that it provides are so central to your way of life. And I know I talked recently about what happens if the power goes out. And a subset of that, what happens if your internet goes out, and all of the things that immediately you can't do. So in some respects, utility services are way of life services, and when they stop or they're interrupted, our way of life changes. So I'm kind of struggling at the moment between this. I want a great customer experience, the kind that Netflix, Amazon, Uber give me, but I also want clean, safe, reliable, and affordable utility services. And certainly affordability is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And I want utilities to be easy to do business with. So I think customer expectations are shifting. I think there's a context within the utility industry in which we have to view that, but being easy to do business is a key thing. And then I think we'll come on to later. I think the utilities now have several really pressing needs, energy transition probably being the biggest one, where they need to build a relationship and influence the customer. So it's not just the customer that's driving the need for centricity.
Thank you for that. Susan, what are your thoughts on that same question?
James said a lot of what I was going to say, so thanks for that. So ditto on everything that James said. I also think, I would argue, James, just to be a little more provocative, that if you needed to get customer service from the Netflixes or the Amazons or the, you name it, Ubers of the world, it isn't that easy. And so the ability to engage and interact or use those services is very intuitive and easy, and similar to utility structure, though, when it doesn't work, it's when you notice it, right? And when you sit there and you think about the millions of things that they could be doing differently to make it easier for you. I remember spending probably 30 or 40 minutes trying to navigate Google to try to get to a human being so that I could talk to them about why their technology was not working the way that all the information in the chat was telling me it should work. So I think when you think about utilities, it's one of those services that when it works, people don't notice. Like, it's just there, and there is this lack of appreciation. In different countries, the utility isn't as reliable, and it isn't always there for them. And so it's less of an issue or less of a, oh my God, when it doesn't work, because it's kind of expected. But in the US, it's expected that those lights come on when you turn them on, and that my internet works because my utility is there providing energy to make sure that my modems and my routers and things are on. So when they don't work is often when we notice that they're not there. What I would argue is that the utility knows that it's not working before I do, often. And so how they treat those moments that matter and those opportunities to engage a customer. And I really think we need to think a lot more about how we banter around this word engage, that a lot of times, in my experiences with utility, all of this information is at a customer. You get once a month, you get a bill from your utility. And if your real experience with your utility is being shaken down for money every single month, like, that's not the best way to interact and engage with somebody. I think that if utilities can shift that thinking towards a model where they actually we're trying to get customer references and referenceability, even if they're in a monopolistic environment, treating a customer in a way that wants to keep that customer and wants to have that customer say good things about you in more of a net promoter score metric, I think is a different way to think about how you engage. And then I think using this word engage traditionally means a two-way process. It's not a marketing at and informing, it's getting something back and having a dialogue and truly engaging. And I think there are ways that the utility can start to shift to show that I've got your back, I care about you, I have information that will help you, and I want to share that with you, and I want you to engage with that. And utilities have, Vanessa, you and I have talked about it. I use the word disgusting amount of customer information. Utilities have a disgusting amount of information about their customers without having to use cookies or any type of information capture. They have it. And I think that's what we can talk about more in this panel, is how to actually use that to engage.
Thank you for that, Susan. So Rupali, how are you seeing, when we talk about how customers are changing, how are you seeing them change your utility customers at SMUD?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what James said about customer expectations being shifted by outside companies, right? Because the fundamentals are being reset by outside players who can deliver personalization and do it quickly. And we tend to think of Amazon and Netflix because those are best practice customers. If you think about ordinary companies like your utility, not your utility, sorry, your cable company, banks, etc., they're doing it really well too, right? I think to my cable company, I can see if the technician is on their way on the app. I can actually see him, kind of like your Uber car is coming and he's in your neighborhood and he's about to show up. And I can see a picture of what he looks like, so I know who to expect at the door. In my online banking, I can see all the transactions, all the messages, all the notes that have gone on in my transaction history. Those things like that, I think the utility needs to be a little bit more mindful of what are the sort of the basic expectations and how they're being redefined by just even ordinary, companies we would think is ordinary, not necessarily in the tech industry or pushing the envelope in terms of products and services. Some other big benefits or some other shifts that I see, is I'm working in strategic planning and thinking about our customers of the future. We have to start thinking about, as millennials, Gen Z, and even Gen Alpha, the younger folks are starting to become the customers of the future, right? They're starting to open up accounts. Millennials are now in their 40s at the very top of the range. And sort of what are they thinking about? And, if you look at the research, they're very much into social causes. Their loyalty is with those companies that they align with on a sort of a value standpoint. And so I think there's some space there as we talk about, James is creating that relationship with the customer. I think there's some space in there to build that loyalty by speaking to the things that they care about, speaking about the environment or what are their actions in the community, in their ads featuring people that, real people versus stock photo models. There's a lot of areas that we can start to move into, but I think it's just a different paradigm shift from where we've traditionally been.
Thank you, and I'm so glad that you brought up generational differences. I feel like whatever conversation is that we're having, we recently with Energy Central did a webinar on the Great Resignation, and it's really talking to different generations about like what you're saying, Rupali. It's the things that matter to them, and they don't all want to be communicated with in the same way. So I think that's so important. I'm really glad that you hit on that. The next question I want to ask all of you is,
James has an adder.
Yeah, just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Couple of things that my fellow panelists said that really interested me. Susan talked about the non-utility industry companies being easy and intuitive. And why is the utility dealing with the utility not easy and intuitive? And I'm not going to try and answer that question other than it isn't, and easy and intuitive works, which means I don't have big call centers, which is why Susan can't get hold of anybody, which becomes a challenge a very small percentage of the time. And then the other thing I just wanted to jump in with, it's funny when I find myself working with younger consultants from big systems integrators on projects, and they will ask the question, why does the utility care about giving good customer service? And there are kind of two sides to that. One is because if you don't and you get very dissatisfied customers, somewhere somebody is regulating and the utility will get into trouble, and that's the stick. The carrot, which was something that JD Power kind of pushed out a number of years ago was for investor-owned utilities who make their money based on a rate of return on capital employed. The rate they are granted, i.e. the percentage they make on that, is inextricably linked to customer satisfaction. So there is therefore a financial incentive for good customer service. So there are really good reasons why we should serve customers well, other than their customers and their people.
100%. I agree with that. So when we talk about, you know, new customer-centric models, there's a lot of talk about customer centricity, and really it's about considering the implications on the customer for all the decisions they're making. That's what customer centricity is. So what do today's best customer-centric models look like? And if you could touch on the fact, resources, we have utilities of different types and sizes, different budgets on the phone that are on the call today. So because resources differ based on, you know, size and different things about the utilities that are different, please comment on, you know, differences among electric utilities of different sizes. And on that question today, we are going to start with Susan. What do you have to say on that?
All right. I think that there are ways that utilities can, first of all, I think in order to be customer centric, you absolutely need to mine that data, but you might also need to talk to customers and interact with customers. And whether it's through surveys, not necessarily digital surveys, but actually having an after call conversation with somebody about why that call came through versus serving through the self-service channels. I think there's a combination of both. And it's a little bit of that human-centered design, like actually doing some field work and capturing as much data as you can. And smaller service providers typically do rudimentary segmentation for program marketing. It's renters versus owners. It's different types of commercial customers based on their SIC codes or however they can slice and dice that data. And it's good. It's not great, but it pushes the boundaries of the data that they have on hand. I think when utilities start to look at, excuse me, how a customer pays, when they pay, are they paying in full but late? Are they calling for payment support when their bill reaches a certain amount? Like that data exists. Are they paying digitally but they aren't on auto bill pay? Like what? Why not? And those are questions that when you start to just tear that data apart can help guide some different program offerings, some different ways to figure out like why aren't people enrolling in this, or how could we, or how might we get more people to do and act and behave in this way. I think when you start to pull back the covers, I just had a recent experience with my son who was moving his cable service or his internet service from the cable company that provides it, and he was complaining that he'd been on chat with the cable service for over 3 hours. And I was like, why are you not? I said, let me just tell you right now, that service agent that has been chatting with you went home. And why would you just not call? And he was like, I don't want to call anybody. I'm like, you would rather sit there and wait for this ping and go back and forth than actually just getting on the phone and knocking this out. And the answer for my 28-year-old son was, yes, I would rather do that. Again, I had him when I was 12. So I don't want to date myself, but I think all of my life happened when I was 12. So I think when you start to actually look at what's driving certain customer behaviors and realize that, yes, utilities have to serve all, there are ways to actually understand that the group of customers that I'll dump into the laggard group that are less likely to adopt digital communications and engagement forums are going away, to put it lightly. And the groups that really are, you know, what Rupalia called this, you know, these are the customers of the future. These are the customers that want that digital transaction. They don't want to have to call. They want 24/7 omnichannel service. And I think utilities that are using those methods, including social and wallet, to engage their customers in different ways, definitely mobile or small screen versus computer-based web engagements, are places where, you know, you got to be where the people are. So I think using the data you have on hand is a great rudimentary way. I think expanding that when you start to get AMI data and build this massive amount of usage curves and how and when people are using energy to actually drive some predictive analytics and some machine learning and behavior and targeting and really slicing that data up more granularly. And then you still need to do that double click. Okay, this group looks like they're eligible for this program and aren't enrolling. Why not? Well, this chunk of that is afraid you're going to share my data. This chunk is too proud and don't believe that they should take this benefit from other people. And this chunk just doesn't think that they're eligible, but they are. So now I can actually segment my marketing messaging to get better results. That's marketing 101, but you got to use your data to identify who's likely to be eligible.
I like that. And I heard somebody make the comment, data is honest. So if it's clean data, it's honest, and it tells you, it's all right there. Rupali, what are your thoughts on new customer centricity models?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could say it better than Susan. I, wholeheartedly agree with everything she said. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all approach to the best customer-centric model, but I think when it comes to utilities of varying sizes, I think it comes down to the investment and what is the commitment from the organization to invest in these customer-centric models. Is it a full-time staff, or a whole team of folks? Do you have to hire consultants? Do you have that in-house expertise that is constantly going to be there as your programs evolve, as your your channels evolve, et cetera? I think, senior leadership made the commitment to make this an organizational priority. Are there shared metrics across the organization that are going to roll up to that, so that you have through the commitment and buy-in of the entire organization, not just those folks that are in the traditional customer department? And then I want to go back again to something that Susan said about those human-centered design, product development, design schemas really do a lot of customer feedback and touch points with the customer, whether it's surveys or one-on-one interviews, those ethnography studies, things like that they are expensive and they're time consuming. And so it's going to add a lot to that internal research that you do. Is the organization willing to take the time to do it and spend the money towards that? I think that's just not something that utilities have really thought about or really had to kind of grapple with in the past.
I think we're making that business case, Rupalia, of spending that extra dollar on those ethnographic studies or those surveys or those focus groups can pay off in the response rates, right? So you go from the standard 2% response rate to an outbound communication to 12%, it's worth it. You need to market less, you need to mail less, so I think it's difficult for many utilities to try to put together that business case before they do it. But I think the payoff's almost always there.
For sure. I think all the time you spend at the front end of it pays off, astronomically on the back end. I think the other thing is you need to be open to changing your design or your model based on that customer feedback.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's hard to do. Oh, I got this piece wrong. How do we tweak it now and then incorporate it into our final design? I think that's an interesting dynamic that's being played out.
Absolutely. So James, we love customer centricity at Utility 2030. What are your thoughts on this question?
Oh, I better have something to say, right? I was just going to pick up
something really wonderful.
Both Rupali and Susan talked about customer feedback, and it would be remiss of me to miss the opportunity to say something about that. I was thinking earlier about this topic, and I have to tone down my language a little bit, but how on earth can we expect to be customer centric if we don't actively engage and talk to our customers and solicit feedback and even search for unsolicited feedback? So voice of the customer, which, as you know, Vanessa, is something that I'm very passionate about, is going to be so important to understanding what customers want and what different types of customers want. And I think that's a big area. But back to the main question around customer centricity in organizational design and utilities. And I'll tell a very quick story, which is, I was trying to rack my brains. I think it's somewhere between 8 and 10 years ago. And I was doing some work with a large transmission distribution provider in the Texas market, working with their head of customer service. And I took the opportunity to ask a mischievous question. And I said to her, I said, do you think that your colleagues in your utility would say that you had meters, ratepayers, or customers? And of course she smiled because she knew I was just doing this to her. And she said, well, of course I would say customers, but if I'm being honest, most of my colleagues would say meters. So customer centricity is something that's relatively new for utilities. And my observation is the organizational design of utilities kind of gets in the way of customer centricity, because utilities is a complex business with so many touch points across so many functions. So the way I'm seeing this being tackled is, increasingly, it's kind of like the overlay. I'm trying to band-aid it. I'm creating customer councils where I bring people together from different functions, very disparate siloed functions. But I'm also seeing, more and more utilities with chief customer officers, a role that 20 years ago probably didn't exist at all. So I think, the big challenge, and we'll probably come back to this, is functional silos. There is a need and recognition that customer centricity and customer experience is really important. And I think we're in the early stages, because I honestly think if you blew up the organization structure for utilities and you started from scratch, you wouldn't end up with the structures that are in place today if your goal was customer centricity.
Absolutely. So the next question I'm going to ask is around challenges that utilities are experiencing as they try to become more customer-centric. And the example I'll give is self-service, right? Self-service is what utilities want to offer, but customers do not have any tolerance for our inadequacies with self-service. So it's all about today where it's all about frictionless. Like, how do you create a frictionless experience? And if it is not frictionless, you're going to hear about it. It's going to affect customer satisfaction. That would be an example of, we're getting these self-service channels out there, but they're not working as well as we should, and we're not looking for those points of friction and fixing them as soon as possible. Rupali, what are you seeing as challenges similar to that?
I think just speed to adoption is probably one of the larger pain points. Traditional utility investment timelines just don't match up with how quickly the technology is evolving, and for us to be as responsive to the customers, we need to be. I think, you have competing priorities, especially in a utility when there's infrastructure upgrades or upgrades to the billing system, things like that. That maybe these customer-centric platforms tend to get have a lower priority than some of those higher needs. I think also several utilities that are in monopolistic markets just don't face the customer pressures that any other private company would face to make sure that they're keeping up with the pace of the customer needs and wants. And so I think you've got a variety of factors that are sort of hindering utilities from really being as agile as they need to be.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. And James, I know you have your own answer to this question, but if you could also address Rupali's, like, what you're seeing, how utilities are overcoming speed to adoption. I know I just sprung that one on both you and Susan, but if you're seeing some things you want to share, that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down some stuff before the webinar, and it was all very consulting speak, like cultural change, mindset shift, entrenched functional silos, and all of those things I think are very significant, very real. I also think, if I approach it from a technology perspective, billing systems or CIS systems don't enable customer centricity. They were designed to run the meter to cash process. They do it very well. Bills are sent out in a timely and accurate fashion, but they don't enable good customer experience and customer centricity, and that's a big hurdle. But I kind of, when I was thinking through this, became a little obsessed by the mind shift necessary. And I'll just give a couple of quick examples from a recent engagement that I had for a large investor-owned utility here in California. Thinking like a customer is something that I think is very hard to do for utilities. I don't know why. And the examples, one I was in a meeting about a program that was all around energy efficiency, which is get to zero. And zero net energy use, which from we need energy efficiency for all kinds of reasons. But the kind of discussion in the meeting was, well, when customers think about get to zero, what they're probably thinking is about zero bill. Don't you think that's what the customer thinks about? And then the other example, which was a really tough shift of mindset, was historically usage display to customers, whether digital or on the bill, has always been in kWh. Well, I know I'm on a time of use rate, and I know that rate has 3 tiers: peak, off-peak, super off-peak. Sorry, 3 time buckets. It also is tiered to 0 to 130% of baseline and above 130%. So there are 6 different price points into which any of my kWh could fall. And so telling me that I used X hundred kWh and my bill is this, I'd have to do the math underneath it. It makes no sense. And the shift that we were able to kind of take as part of the project was to start displaying usage behavior in dollars, so people could understand what it was costing them to use peak energy, because that's what will motivate them to use in off-peak or super off-peak times, not just a kWh space. But that was a huge cultural shift to think about it that way. So I think, to me, there are many barriers. See, old CIS technology being one of them, but to me, it's think like a customer, have the courage to simplify things for the customer.
That's good. And Susan, I know as James started talking about the CIS not really being the tool for customer centricity, I saw you light up. I know you've got thoughts on that as well.
You and I have had these conversations before. The CIS system, like James said, was meant for billing. I think in today's world, where you have large commercial and industrial customers and large ag customers get a lot of focus. They spend a lot of money with utility companies, and they have a lot of grid requirements and needs, typically have special service providers, key account managers to support them. And to go down this rabbit hole a little bit, I think those key account managers struggle significantly to support those customers, because not unlike a situation where you've got roommates or people who are taking advantage of the energy consumption and maintaining the facility in a residential space, same as a large commercial industrial space, those people might want to call about their bill or their service, and they can't do that because the only way the utility sees the customer is by that person who gets the bill or that organization that gets the bill. And so I think to shift to this customer-centric model where maybe the customer account data is held separately from the billing information, so that there are different people authorized to engage in the account, and the people that need to know who are on the ground operating this facility or living in this place can have access to and manage that account is not a bad thing. Also get communications about that account. I think one of your question though around the biggest challenge utilities are experiencing, I think, is this: many utilities and utilities that I have worked with directly or have worked with in my career are challenged with what I'll call short-term itis. That's often driven by their regulatory funding cycles, right? They get 3 years worth of funding or 5 years worth of funding or whatnot. And so they really have to think in these chunks, and it makes it really clunky for them to be agile. They also strive for certainty. And when your customers' requirements and your customer expectations, the environment with wildfires and hotter, there are storms happening in places where storms never happened before, like they're happening, and at the extent that they're happening. And utilities are going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable in uncertainty and in an agile, and not only agile technology development, but also just becoming more nimble and comfortable doing things. And typically utilities don't like to try things. They just want to do things. And I think that there's a really good opportunity for utilities to, I hate to use the word pilot because that's perceived by utilities as a very different thing, but they're often large scale pilots. But I think you could do test and learns with 100, 1,000 customers to see if it's the right solution, to give them a little bit more comfort whether this is the right way to go. But you still need that nimbleness and that agility to be able to pivot. To Rupali's point, like if the information coming back to you isn't telling you that your hypothesis was accurate, are you ready to pivot to plan B or plan C? So I think helping utilities not only break out of that status quo itis, but also that short-term itis is something that technology providers can do, that people working, there are people working within utilities who are dying to get their teeth into something, and they know that there's a better way. And to give those people a little leash to do things that will light them up, and also be very customer centric and try things that don't cost a ton of money. There's a term called prototyping, where you kind of put it together with baling wire and bubble gum and some foil, and then you MacGyver a solution to try to test it out and do something quickly and learn from it. And you said Vanessa, data is honest, and I think data is honest, but it also can lead to some generalizations and even risk some profiling that are not accurate until you take it to the next level. So I think we need to, use this feedback from these tests to learn and see what actually is honest and what is working and what isn't working, and include customer conversations in those.
100%.
James, you
So
waved
the next
your
question
hand.
we're going to.
Yeah,
I didn't know if you were raising the roof or had something to.
Hi.
I don't know, I can't remember exactly when I had this revelation, but I literally slapped myself on the forehead. And I've been trying to figure out why that desire to experiment and test with customers wasn't there in the utility industry, where I've seen it very much in other industries. And my realization, and this is just me being dumb, was safety and reliability is so central to utilities and the provision of services, and it is never going to not be enormously important. But what I think I realized in that moment when I slapped myself on the forehead was somehow that the conservative and safe driven culture has become pervasive to customer experience. So we treat customer experience a bit like we treat things that can electrocute people.
Yeah,
and
very
it's
tender.
not, and it's inappropriate in a time when, as you said, technology is evolving rapidly. And Rupali, you were saying, the ability to keep up with the technology and leverage it is kind of hindered a little bit around the kind of cycles that utility has. But I just wanted to make that comment that I think culturally, again, it's about having the courage to experiment, gather feedback, pivot where necessary. And I just, I think that's a challenge. Sorry.
Absolutely. So I wanted to give everyone notice that after this next question, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Christina Corcoran is on the phone today, and she's going to facilitate that. And so we'll have 2 opportunities for you to ask questions after the next question and at the end of this session. And so if you've got questions, please type them in the chat now, and we'll proceed on to the next question. So the next question is around really the heart and soul of what this webinar is about, and it's on making better use of customer data. And I would love to throw out this example of something that just happened to me and was very frustrating. So my company had a subscription, an annual subscription to a service, like a lot of us, these cloud services, and realized that nobody was using it and we had not turned it off. And so when we called them and said, we're no longer using this, we want to cancel, they said, well, we just renewed you for a year, so you're going to have it another year. That's 2 years of non-use that we are paying for. What if a company went and said, using customer data, said, guess what, Vanessa is not using this service. I'm going to call her and let her know and ask her if she wants to turn it off before I bill her again. And then, you know what, maybe I'd be a customer who came back. At this point, and Christina was with me on this, we will never use that service provider again. They have completely turned us off. We are going to have our 2nd year of paying for it and not using it. So in your experience, panelists, I'd love to hear ideas like that. Like, what is a way to make better use of data, new things that maybe utilities on the phone haven't thought of yet? And we're going to go ahead and start that one out with Susan. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my God, again, Vanessa, you and I feel like we've had these conversations, and not just recently.
Kindred spirits.
So I know it's like echo chamber. So I think, my experiences with my credit card, who will notify me that my AT&T bill or my cable Xfinity Comcast bill is a little bit higher than it typically is. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And then I turn to my Xfinity and my Comcast people and my AT&T people. I'm like, you guys knew that it was going to be higher, and you said nothing. You're evil. And I love my credit card. Like, who should I be loving? Not my credit card. My credit card is billing me every month lots of money, and they're going to charge me a lot of money if I don't pay it on time and in full. But that's the people I love, and I hate these people. Like, that's wrong. And I look at utilities, and I mean, this has been a long experience of mine, where I even went to our director of marketing at my old company and I said, like, this is my experience. We know what people's bills are going to be. Why are we not telling them? And why are we not telling them when it's dangerously high towards a point where they might not pay? So that's one way I think utilities, and that's not new. I mean, many utilities are doing these when they water utilities specifically too, because of water conservation in California, where they register a leak in the usage pattern, or what seems like a leak, they are alerting people to go take take some action. And many utilities are using what are called high bill alerts or bill forecast alerts to let their customers know that what their bill forecast is forecast to be, just to give them some insights. And I think that feedback is important. I also think looking at the customer holistically, and we use the word customer 360, I think if a utility were to sit down and think about every touch point they have with a customer, and not just from the bill or from a marketing piece or from an outage experience or from their self-service experience, but when the crews are out in the street jackhammering during my baby's nap time, or the crews come out and trim trees that are falling into my, the leaves and the debris is falling into my yard, or maybe that's a tree that I really love to look at out my window, but it's putting the power lines in danger. The meter person comes to do a meter read or a meter check or a meter replacement. Those are customer touch points. And if the utility isn't thinking about how to use the data to feed information to all those people to make sure that that customer is known by that entity, and similar to the, Rupali, I think, talked about knowing that this person is coming to my house when the Uber or the Lyft driver is on their way. The utilities could do the same thing. This person is coming to your house. There's a lot of fraud out there too, where people pretend they're gas service agents and knock on people's doors, and utilities don't do that. But if the utility put in place data to be able to show customers that this person is coming, or these crews are going to be working on your street, here's what they're doing, here's what we know about you. We know you have a young baby in your house, or we know that you've got somebody on medical service. We want to just let you know because we care. And I think that, excuse me, I was getting a little choked up. Like, the utility can show that they have their customers back, and they can show that they care, and they have the information. And I think, if I had somebody outside working on my power system and I wanted to go out and engage them because I had another concern, for that person to say, that's not my job, it's not my area, I can't help you, that's a terrible customer experience. That is not an engaging moment. And I think utilities, it's challenging because of unions and constraints that the union workers are put, the boxes that they're put within. But I think that there are ways to give them information that allow them to help the customer help themselves. And that's where I think there's big opportunities to just keep the whole organization engaged in what's happening with these customers using data.
100%. So James, how about you? Better ways to use data than we're using it today. What have you got?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, but to echo what both Rupali and Susan have said, let's come back quickly to the Customer 360. And Customer 360 is a term that's used very, very frequently, but it's very hard to actually deliver. And in part, in the utility industry, it's very hard to deliver because of the complexity. And Susan listed all different kinds of touch points. But if you think about it, I've got interval data from smart meters. I've got billing data when I bill a customer. I've got payment data when the customer pays, hopefully. I may have collection data when the customer doesn't pay. I've got program enrollments. I've got interactions on the web, interactions with contact center agents, interactions with field service agents. I've got third-party data that I'm porting in. It's a huge set of data, but that data is hard to build and join together. And if you can't do that, it's very hard to then act on the data to deliver value in terms of good experience to the customer. Susan did a great job of kind of listing off some great examples, whether it's bill to date and forecast, whether it's detecting abnormal consumption. I was just going to share my experience of an example of leakage detection. And abnormal consumption traditionally has been done with a very simple metric, which is, we'll take a percentage, and if we see that your consumption is 30% over the average of the last 3 months, we'll deem that to be weird, and we might send somebody out to investigate. Now, the good thing about that is, if there is a genuine leak from, say, a water perspective, you're always going to find it. The problem is, you're also going to go and find lots of people who just happen to be using more water that week, or happen to have family staying. And I was lucky enough to be involved in a project focusing on this using advanced analytics. And the difference was, we didn't have to use a very basic it's a 30% increment over the last 3 months of average. We could actually use kind of interval reads to map the signature of a leak. And we identify 3 different types of leaks that could occur and map those so that our false positive rate would drop dramatically, which means crews are spending time going investigating genuine problems, not 1 in 5 happens to be a genuine problem. And funnily enough, Susan, we did a pilot. This utility wanted to do a pilot. And the interesting thing was this is behind the meter leaks. So the customer's responsibility, but they recognize that they often give credits because you leak a lot of water, the bill goes up, and out of the gesture of goodwill, they give credits. They also felt it was about looking after their customers, identifying leaks early so the customer wasn't faced with a very large bill. And we had a great story on the pilot, and we would do the leak detection overnight. We'd identify and prioritize a list of customers with potential leaks, and they would send field crew out to investigate. But they would call them first. So they called this gentleman and said, based on the data we have, it looks like you have a leak on the property. Are you aware of this? And the gentleman said no, and he looked around his property, couldn't find anything, and was asked, would you mind if we send a crew out to investigate? And initially he was very resistant. I don't have a problem, I don't need a crew, it's okay, everything's fine. But the data says you have a leak. If it's okay, we'll send somebody out. So they send a technician out. The technician goes all around the property, can't find anything. Talking to this gentleman, elderly gentleman, in the hallway of his home, the technician hears the sound of water in the wall. And there's a pipe that started to split that's leaking in the wall. And they were able to identify that, get it repaired before it burst, and which would have caused major damage, major water loss. And so the joke was our analytics can see through walls. But that's an example of using interval data to deliver a way better customer experience and potentially save everybody money along the way. So,
well, and I'll just pile onto that too. I think that there are ways to send an alert that you have a leak or you have high energy use, but to go into that double click so that I'm not racing around my house and checking hose bibs and toilets and faucets and, waiting for the faucet to drip or waiting to hear the toilet run or doing the blue dye test. Like giving people the power and enabling them to go after that is a huge extra, like that's the engagement piece, not just at you have a leak, warning, you have a leak, your bill's going to be high, or you have a high energy consumption, but here's what it looks like and here's what you can do about it.
yeah,
and
one of the signatures was identifying in toilets when the valve isn't closing, and you can see that in the usage pattern.
Yeah.
Back to you, Vanessa.
Rupali, what are your thoughts on that same question? How is SMUD using data better than you have in the past?
Yeah, I think the panelists have talked a lot about sort of problem detection. And I'm going to take a slightly different twist and say, I think we can deliver better customer experiences just using very basic data. We know a customer has signed up for a new account, right? There's been a service activation, so you have that piece of information. Now we know their address, we know the age of their home, we know their square footage, et cetera. And you can make some basic assumptions based on that. If they have a solar that they've interconnected, and possibly we would know if they have an electric vehicle. But based on that, you can start to offer them things, welcome to the neighborhood. SMUD has a contractor network available to you. These are some rebates that may be applicable given the age of your home. If you're interested in lowering your carbon footprint or being more energy efficient, here are some tips, et cetera. So I think just stitching together really basic information and proactively putting it out before waiting for them to seek information about rebates, et cetera, I think can be extremely powerful. And then to that end, if they do take on rebate, what are now the interactions that we can continue with the customer after they've done that? Here's tips on using your equipment, settings that you could use, how to change your equipment for the seasons changing, any alerts that we have to offer, et cetera. So I think fundamentally, just some really basic things that the customer does that we can enhance by just continuing the conversations after they've taken that action in a relevant way, using segment data, preferences, things like that.
A thread that I saw that ran through all of your answers really is this idea of being proactive, like not waiting, being proactive. I heard somebody recently say, we get a whole lot of bad surprises, from your tax bill to the fact that your engine blew up in your car. How many times do we get positive surprises, and what that could do to build customer loyalty? Like, surprise, I'm finding a problem that you didn't know you had, or I'm offering you this thing. So I love that idea of let's surprise customers in positive ways.
When was the last time your cable company or your cell phone company contacted you and said, we've got a way better rate that will save you money?
No, I have to call them and threaten to leave.
Yeah. And it becomes this stupid game. Whereas if they did
Well,
it, to your experience earlier, Vanessa, if they had been proactive, you would be loyal.
or at least you
100%,
maybe you wouldn't
but now I'm just
maybe you
mad.
wouldn't, yeah, and maybe you wouldn't stay with them, but you definitely talk to them about someone else about them. And that's why I feel like you may not maintain them as a customer. They may not keep you as a customer, but they've kept you as a loyal subscriber. And there's a difference. I also think this idea of that you mentioned, Vanessa, like if I give you feedback on the surprises that might be bad for you, like you might have a water leak and it's driving your bill up, you could also, I think you could also tell people when they're doing a good job. Like these energy reports that folks got often make them angry because they're kind of in this like, what else can I do? Blood from a turnip. There's not much more I can do. We're eating cold sandwiches and bundling up in the winter. How can I still not be more efficient than these people that I'm being compared to? And it's very frustrating for people. So I think when they do better to say, not sure what you're doing, or maybe I do have interval data that's telling me what it looks like you did, to give them a pat on the back around that. I think, that's a reward that doesn't need money to keep up the behavior. And I think, to motivate people with information is one thing, but to not show them what to do about it or how that helps them or hurts them, or you got to have both, the motivator and the enabler.
Well, and really it comes down to this idea of being relational and not transactional. Like that particular company I mentioned, they wanted my money and that was a transaction for them. Had they built a relationship, they would have gotten a lot more than what we're paying them for this, for this next year. So I, in all things business, think about the transaction. Money at the time is not worth it to me if it's going to ruin the relationship. So I think that's an important point. Okay, so we're going to take a break here. We're going to turn it over to Christina. Everybody say hi to Christina. I know that she's got some questions from the audience. Christina, do you want to get us started on those?
Sure, thanks, Vanessa. It's been a great conversation. We do have a couple of really good questions here. The first one was asked actually a while ago, and it was something that Rapoli had said. It's Adam Schwab asked, Rapoli mentioned a forward-facing application for service technician availability or response. I agree with this very interesting service that can be provided, but I think utilities also expose themselves to a risk of creating a negative customer experience with these things. For example, your power is out, we've dispatched person A, they will arrive in 30 minutes, then a large outage happens and we redirect person A. Now what do we tell the customer?
Yeah, certainly, yes. That's the risk and that can happen. But, I think of, that's one extreme, but I think, right now it's often you're getting a door tag that someone's going to come in 4 weeks to maybe trim a tree in your backyard, right? With no set time, et cetera. So I think there's opposite ends of how this can work. I think, yes, that is probably a risk, but I think the alternative to at least being aware and not just waiting, getting those 4-hour, 8-hour blocks of time can be extremely frustrating too. So I think it's a little bit of that risk reward balance that you need to do.
I would say, think about if it were your dentist and you were told you had a 2 o'clock appointment and then somebody had an emergency and you couldn't have your 2 o'clock appointment anymore. It's the same scenario. We had an emergency and I can't keep your appointment anymore. Tell them that. Apologize. Tell them why you can't keep the appointment. I think most humans are pretty empathetic towards societal good, to say, look, we had a major outage. It impacts a lot more people. There's some folks with medical conditions within that group. We're not going to be able to make our appointment. We're going to reschedule as quickly as possible and then keep that promise. And I would also say, don't even say quickly as possible. You will hear from us before tomorrow or tomorrow before noon, and then keep that promise.
Couldn't agree more.
And in advance. Nothing's worse than showing up at the dentist and them telling you there's an emergency and you've made it all the way to the dentist counter.
Exactly.
That happens. That's happened to me. Sorry about that, James. Go ahead.
No, no problem. I couldn't agree more. Have the courage to be honest and to apologize from time to time. I mean, my experience was we were looking at different types of outages, and there's something here in California called a public safety power shutoff, where you've got very arid conditions, you've got high, often Santa Ana winds, create this situation where there's a good chance that a transmission line could go down and start a wildfire. And you know, I know my fellow panelists are in California. Wildfires are a big deal. They destroy people's properties. They destroy lives. And sometimes shutting the power line off is the right thing to do. Nobody likes doing it. And the thing that kind of triggered me on this was it was categorized as an unplanned outage. And my argument, and I got very antsy about this, I was like, it's anything but unplanned. And you need to share the amount of time, effort, money, technology that's used to assess the risk, to decide what if the risk is enough to actually switch power off. And when you do switch the power off, you do it out of real genuine concern. And you need to tell people why you do it. And that now happens. And it's so refreshing to see that honesty. And you know, nobody likes the inconvenience. But I can tell you now, nobody would like a wildfire either, and it's the better option. So that, again, I kind of keep coming back to the word courage, the courage to be honest. And I think in some ways, we've all forgotten. It's okay. It's okay when everything isn't perfect. It's better to admit and apologize when it isn't.
I agree wholeheartedly. Christina, do you have another question from the audience?
We have a question here. Should utilities aspire to be like Amazon, Netflix, and Uber? And if not, why?
Oof.
Great question.
Well, I told you I was having angst about this. You go first, Susan, and then I'll.
So what I would say, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this at the Utility 2030 session, is I would say take the things about, what about Amazon makes Amazon Amazon? What about Netflix makes Netflix Netflix? And what about Uber makes Uber Uber? What are the things that you appreciate about those services? Or pick others, you know, pick your grocery store, or it doesn't even have to be a tech service, you know, pick something. What do you love about your car? Like, pick those attributes that work for you, and then figure out how those attributes could be plugged in or twisted to serve your organization. So what do you like about Netflix? They tell you what everybody else is watching. They tell you what, based on your watch history, what you might enjoy. So it's like choice overload. If you just thought about it, like every time you looked at that list of things that are available, they started at A or 0 and then went through all the numbers that of the shows that start with numbers, and then they went to the alphabet. It would be horrible experience. But at least you can categorize by drama or comedy or this or that. But also they're mining data on you, and they're telling you what you might like to see. And so making it easy to make a choice when there's so much to choose from, so much content to choose from, is one of the things that's great about Netflix. That it's not relatively inexpensive comparatively, but it's there for you. And I also, you know, I joked at a creative session that I had with my former utility, and I said, you know, if we twist this question around a little bit, and we actually are trying to reduce calls to the call center. First line of defense is self-service. That's great. But what if we stop putting our phone number on everything? And it was based on the Netflix, Google, Amazon experience, you know, that they don't put their phone number on everything. They want people to have to self-serve first. And so I think those are models that many customers would very much appreciate. Yes, your regulator will make you put your phone number on certain things, but not everything. And so to make sure that it's very, very easy and intuitive for customers to do web searches on what they're trying to solve within your utility, and not get, use your Google Word search, pay for that, because it'll get people into those channels much faster. But you know, again, think about the attributes of these organizations. You know, the Uber showing where people are on a map. I love Lyft, that I can go rent a bike that's parked on the corner by me, and just get on it and ride and leave it somewhere else. It's, there are these things that make it really easy for me to do business with them. And also give me some joy, right? Like, I get where I want to go. I can drink all I want, and I can get home without being in a drunk driving accident or getting pulled over. Not that I go drunk. But I think, there are these attributes that give me joy, and I think that there are ways that the utility could think about that.
Yeah, as I said, this is something that's been vexing me, and excuse me. I think I've learned a little bit recently about it, and my short answer is no. Utilities shouldn't be like Amazon, Uber, and Netflix. It's not that it's they're different industries. They're different business models. They're for-profit business models where customers only buy their services if they opt in to do so. And most utilities are very different. On the regulated side, non-competitive, customers don't have a choice. And I mentioned affordability before, but I like the concept that Susan alluded to around look at what they do, figure out what makes sense within a utility context. How do I deliver better service while keeping service affordable? Because affordability is a big challenge. So I'm going to say be inspired by, but carefully select what you might copy, mimic, or adopt. Don't try to become, because you can't afford it, because all the investments they make in customer service and technology are driven by getting more money from existing customers, keeping customers longer, attracting new customers, and that just isn't the model for most utilities.
No, and I think that, a lot of utilities are going to have a hard time buying their way into customer satisfaction. I think they can start to build trust, and that's within keeping promises, making. I would push, like, provocatively, that most customers don't want to think about their utility. They really don't. They don't even want to get a bill. So if you could get to the model where I'm on auto bill pay and I'm in electronic payments, so that's taken care of, and then I'm on e-billing, and you're just going to let me know if something changes, like, then I really don't have to think about you. And let me know when that, then build that trust. Like, let me know when there's an outage. Let me know how long it's going to last. Let me know if something's going to disrupt my life in my home where I live and work these days, or my children are in school these days. Let me know if my usage is excessive. Give me things that, like, average bill programs or prepaid programs where I really just write you a check for the whole year and I don't have to think about you anymore. And it's hard for utilities to go like, we still need them to engage. Well, then you're not setting them a bill anymore, and the only reason they need to pay attention to you is when you do tactfully, contextually, thoughtfully personalize an outreach campaign.
So I wanted to say really quickly, at Utility 2030, we've got this work group focused on the Amazon experience. Why do people love it? What's the relevance for utility? Like, what can we take from that or not take? And some of the words I wrote down as you were all talking is why I love Amazon, because I'm pretty sure that I'm their best customer. Why I love Amazon is because it's frictionless. It's why I mentioned before, frictionless. There is no friction. They get it perfect almost every time. It's convenient. It's smart and intuitive. Susan, you mentioned intuitive. It's smart. It knows what you want. It makes suggestions. And as you mentioned, easy. But I will tell you, when I don't like Amazon, when I said they're almost perfect, when they don't get it perfect, it is hard as heck to get anybody on the phone to help you. That is when, or when you need to return something and you've got to contact the seller. So there are things about it that aren't, we want our customers, when things aren't going well, to be able to contact us probably easier than that. The way they get away with it, though, is they're almost perfect. The perfect is we don't want to think about it. It's frictionless.
They're a guilty pleasure of mine, because I do feel very guilty about what the pressure it puts on the workers and the system and the trash and the cardboard and the deliveries. And I do have that, my little sustainability demon gets on me and goes, bangs me over the head anytime I use it. But I'm a subscriber.
That's a good point, though.
I have a funny story about Amazon since we're talking about that. I live in a new development, so my street's new. My house is here, but my mailbox is one street over. And so when I get my Amazon packages, which I can track, sometimes the driver gets confused for my mailbox, which is on another street. So my packages have been just dropped off on some random house in my little bowling at times because I think they're trying to find my mailbox, which the big box doesn't fit into my mailbox. So to solve that, I was tracking the Amazon driver on my phone, saw he was driving past my street, bolted out onto my driveway, flagged him down and told him, this is my address, I need my package. Don't drop it off on some other guy's house. And so he, we cleared that up. And since then, I have gotten all my packages. So sometimes you need a mental intervention to fix the
Yeah, not to belabor the Amazon thing too much, but I do think that there's this, I live in San Francisco in the city, and there's a lot of porch pirate stuff going on, and my nextdoor.com is full of the porch pirate woes. But I think, Amazon recognizes that that's a problem, and they pivot quickly to address that because it's a pretty big loss for them as well, or their vendors or providers. So I think, again, back to what do they do well? They pivot. When they see a problem, they figure out, they probably get, I don't know how they do their innovation, that would be interesting, but they get in a room and they're like, what could we do better? How do we get feedback to our drivers and to our delivery people on whether they're delivering it in a good way? Were you happy with how they delivered it? How do we let you as the purchaser tell the driver where you want that thing to be delivered? And hopefully the drivers follow those instructions. And so, there's this feedback loop that they've put in place. Just, again, they pivoted and they've thoughtfully executed some solutions that change a lot. Every time I go in there, there's a little something different. So.
Oh boy, now in my mind, San Francisco is full of people looking like Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean, sulking because there's not as much business for them.
Stealing in their warship cars, stealing things.
Curse ye, Amazon.
The porch pirates.
Christina, did you have any other questions, or should we move on?
We do have one more question if you guys have the time for this, or we can go back to it. But the question
Let's
would
go
be,
ahead and do it.
all right, so the question is from Andreas Keel. And Andreas asks, what do you think the likely adoption will be for a simple app-based tool that shows how much lower your bill could be as a way to start a conversation?
Susan, go ahead.
I think it would be high. I think that this is done today through prepay energy programs where there is daily feedback on, I call it the gas tank view. Here's how much gas you put in the tank in a prepay situation. I put $40 in. And then every day you see how that $40 diminishes. And there's a huge amount of energy conservation effects through prepay programs. Not sure which variable in the whole program design causes that, or combination of variables cause that effect. I'd love to get that study done. But I think when people start to get feedback on this really amorphous thing that is their energy consumption, it's one of the few services that you pay for after the fact. So once you've already committed your sins and then get that bill for it, you don't have a way to fix it. And I think to be able to get that feedback on a regular basis, maybe not necessarily on every single thing in your house that uses energy, because I think you get to the point where, if I see that, and some of this is, James, to your point, like what's a kilowatt hour, what's a watt, telling me that my television is drawing 8 watts when it's not being used. Well, how does that if I'm not also given information on how that compares to a more efficient television and selling another television to me that is more efficient, then that doesn't help. That information doesn't help me. It just tells me like unplug your TV, but it doesn't tell me whether I could have a television that is much more efficient than what I have. Similarly, knowing that my refrigerator is pulling a lot of power, well, what do you want me to do? Unplug it? Change the temperature so that my food spoils? So, there are these bits of information that are interesting, but not necessarily helpful. And I think to think about just what really, and I'm in the residential mode right now, but I think commercial and industrial is a completely different story, where we're having building analytics. A lot of large commercial and industrial buildings have very detailed analytics on how their equipment in buildings are performing from an energy standpoint, and to avoid demand charges and things that drive different behaviors. But on a residential front, I think getting information on that also could motivate people to behave differently, and then enabling them to take steps where, maybe one of the things that you could challenge through this app is to go find air leaks. And you could suggest that they play a game and they light a little incense cube, or they a little stick, and they walk around and see if there's the smoke is being sucked out through windows or through gaskets, outlets around, exterior walls or doors, and then point them to a list of solutions and how-tos through YouTube, or here's what you need to buy. You need to buy some caulk. Here's a video on how to apply the caulk. Here's a video on how to install an outlet gasket. Here are ways to solve this problem that you have. And I can't tell you whether it's going to turn around and make your bill go down $100. It probably won't, but at least you've solved the problem, and you were motivated to do it by this fun thing and enabled by videos and tools to show you how to do it. And those can be pretty simple activities that people could engage in and kids could engage in. I mean, that's the audience that'll do that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So I want to move to the next question here, and just to be mindful of time, it looks like we've got about 19 minutes left. I've got 3 more questions, and then we'll take audience questions again. So again, if you want to go ahead and put them in the chat, we will definitely try to get to those. If we don't get to them by the end, we will email you answers. We'll go out to the panelists and they'll weigh in, and we'll email you answers. So I wanted to talk now. It's really interesting. I was just listening to a podcast, and it talked about, it was challenging this old adage that, like, after 29 days of an activity, or 30, or whatever the magic number is, you can form a habit, right? And if that was true, then we would never fall off the wagon with our exercise programs, or if you vowed to stop drinking, or whatever it is. What this podcast, this speaker was challenging, is this idea of you have to believe in it emotionally, right? If you don't believe in emotionally with the causes, eventually you're not going to stick with it. And so when we think about, we talk a lot about behavioral change. A lot of people think energy efficiency is a good idea. They think DERs are a good idea. How can utilities use their data, is what we're looking at here, in terms of using that to try to get desired behavioral changes that utilities are looking for, like behaviors, things that you want your customers to do. And with that one, we're going to start with Rupali. What are we all doing at SMUD?
Yeah, I think, it's a combination of things that we've sort of touched on before, but if we can use that data and understand where the customer is and look at what it is you're trying to get them to do with the behaviors you're trying to change, it's ultimately that using that data and a touch point with the customer to have that continuous feedback loop and really identify and pinpoint what is the value proposition to the customer. What is the gain that they're going to get by doing this, or what is the pain that you're removing, right? It's either got to make them happy or at least lessen some sort of pain or hard thing that they're trying to solve. So I think if you can frame whatever you're doing in a way that's going to resonate with the customer, not why the utility is doing it. We know why we're doing it. I feel like the utility likes to talk about it from our perspective, but I think if you can reframe it, and it can be the same thing that you reposition 4 or 5 different ways based on knowing customer sentiment and their preferences, then you can get engagement across the board on whatever it is, but you pivoted your message and you really made it personal and relevant to them. And that's how you can kind of get to that better level of customer adoption, because you've made that personal appeal for something that matters to them.
I like that. Thank you. James, what are your thoughts on that same question? Behavior change.
Very much aligned with what Rupali said, which is, and really energy transition is the big deal. Intermittency of wind and solar means in the absence at this point in time of cost-effective large-scale battery storage technology, we need to shift customer behaviors. So here in California, between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m., the way that that's being done is to charge more per kWh. It's peak pricing. So it's really kind of the stick, not the carrot. But you have to encourage customers and get them to understand the implications. But the way in which data is used in that process, and in California, the model for time of use rates was customers are defaulted in but can opt out if they want to, which isn't the case for everybody. Sometimes it's the other way, which is I can offer the rate and I have to convince customers to get in. But either way, you should be trying to convince customers, to Rupali's point, what is the benefit for them? So if you think about that, I'm now designing a whole new set of rates. How do I know as a utility what that's going to do to my revenue? I need to do mass scale build simulation. And then I'm going to have to go through a whole bunch of questions of how those rate changes are likely to impact different groups of customers and make sure I'm not disproportionately penalizing certain groups of customers at the expense of others. And those are the kind of questions that I'm going to get from the regulator, the interveners. But ultimately, it comes all the way down to how is it going to impact each and every one of my maybe over 1 million customers? And how do I share that information with them in a way that they feel good about the decision to be defaulted in? And my experience, because I went through this, was I got a very simple communication. It showed me what my annual bill would be on my current non-time of use rate. It gave me 2 time of use alternatives that I could be one of which I'd be defaulted into, and what my annual bill would be. And there was very little difference. And so it was just an easy decision to glance at that and make the decision to allow myself to be defaulted in. But when you think about the volume of data, the volume of billing calculations to get there, it's huge. It's a big deal. It requires a lot of technology and a lot of processing power, but it makes the customer's job easy. And they're just looking at the dollars and saying, yeah, I can shift onto that rate, and shifting onto that rate, I know what my bill is going to be. The other final thing I'll just quickly say about that was you also know which customers who, if they really don't change behavior, are going to suffer when they move on to time of use. And you might choose to push those customers in later and give yourself more time to educate them the kind of usage behavioral changes that they need, or potentially the programs they could enroll in, so that they're not being penalized. But again, it's several million customers, bill simulation, use that data to help the customer on their journey.
Very good. Susan, what are your thoughts?
James, I call that the 2-year-old strategy, which is how do you treat a 2-year-old when you need them to get dressed? They need to get dressed. They can't run around naked all day long, which my 2-year-olds both would have had I allowed that. But you give them 2 choices, right? Give them 2 choices and they get to choose one. Unfortunately, I am one of those customers who there is no good answer for that default, because I'm in San Francisco and I've been unduly benefiting from our cool climate. And so no matter what rate plan I go on from the default options, I will be penalized, but I've got to pay my share now, which is what the whole purpose of this whole transition is. But my whole theory is based in behavioral science, which essentially says, I mean, this is very simplistic view, and there's the nudge and the default mechanism that can get people to change their behaviors. But ultimately, 2 things have to be in place to get somebody to do something. And by the way, you all can use this on families and friends. They have to be motivated and they have to be able to do something. And so if a utility wants to get somebody to do something, to take action, to enroll, to reduce their consumption, to do something, they have to motivate them somehow. And that can be done in what I'll say are 3 different dimensions. Personally, like using data like Rupali's talking about to know what inspires them, what they care about. And it could go from, saving kittens to being able to drive their car more and have more money for gas, or shop more, or do something like that. So personally, good for your kids, good for the environment, good for the planet, like figure out how to personally motivate people. Socially is that normative behavior that we get through, or we see through home energy reports. Like normal people are behaving in this way. So when you have data that shows that the majority of a certain social group, and the tighter you can get to that customer social group, the better. Your neighborhood, we use people like you or homes like you, but I think when you think about it, figure out how to get that social group tied together somehow using data, then you can say most of the people within this social group are doing this. Will actually drive people to act, and that's why you see a lot of times when water agencies do chirp replacement programs or solar rooftops start to go in. They start to go in clusters in neighborhoods because people want to keep up with the Joneses. And then you have this what I'll call the environment area where you can motivate, or the structural area that you can motivate. And that's where you see rewards and incentives and recognition and things like that pop up. And I'll just lump consequences into that, whether they're good consequences like rewards, or bill savings or bad consequences. Bill will go up if you don't act. So those are motivators. And then the enablers fall into those same categories. So if I can highly motivate a customer, but then they don't have any way to do anything about it, how do you think they feel? Probably frustrated, angry, losing trust. If they're not motivated and they can do it, they just don't care. And so if they are highly motivated and you give them some ways to do it, and personally, you can do it for them, defaulting them, giving them choice, giving them the information. Socially, you can default them or enable them by showing them that others have done this and it didn't hurt. And that's where those little stars on Amazon really come in well. But also you can show them testimonials and videos of people like them, not actors, who have taken the leap and had a good time with it. And that's where mavens and influencers are really powerful motivators and enablers. And then you have that structural or environmental space to enable. And that's again where make it easy. When they walk into that retailer to buy that energy efficient product, don't stuff it in the back. Try not to have so many signs on everything that distract people. And this is where, make it simple for them to make that choice or make that decision or take that action is critical.
Absolutely. Rupali, what are your thoughts on the same question? Oh, I am not where I'm supposed to be on my script. I need to ask you a new question. You're like, I can answer that again, so I need to repeat myself. So at Utility 2030, we say the great enablers of customer centricity and CX are people and technology. And James can weigh in, we recently did a study on technology investments. I would love to hear from all of you or what you're seeing as the leading technology investments to help support this evolution of customer centricity. And with that one, we are going to start with Susan again. Hi again.
Hi, thanks. Hi again. What I am seeing, and it's not just because I'm at a technology company, but really is that this investing in cloud technologies to be able to scale and use this massive amount of data that they have, but also to get a lot more flexibility in that systems that they have, and trying to move away from on-prem software to cloud-based software that allows them to untether themselves from the systems that they've been tied to for so long that have been it's kind of what I call it spaghettiware, right? Where you've kind of bubble gummed and baling wired this thing together for years to make it work across these different platforms, and now the technology has innovated so fast and so to come so far where integrations with all these different solutions that you may have are so much easier. Keep that billing system, keep that CIS system, but there's services like the contact center consoles and the Salesforce and the things that Salesforce offers are so easy to integrate with those tools and to enable this customer 360 view to allow an agent or a field worker or someone to get a full 360-degree view of that customer that they're about to go work with. How did they call into the call center? What were they trying to do self-service before they called? Why didn't self-service work? Getting that data back to the self-service channels and the digital experience channel to tell them that we're still getting a lot of calls about this thing that should be being caught on that side, and enabling the customers to work, the people who serve customers to actually serve those customers. And I think utilities are starting to think a lot more about, once you've taken care of the easy calls, so I'm like going to change my intro to this. Once you've deflected the easy stuff, the calls that do make it through to the call center agents are going to be harder. And those agents are going to need tools and solutions and services to not only solve that customer's problem, but actually solve the customer. And those customer service agents are wired to help. They're wired to serve. And so utilities who are still using metrics like average handle time, I think are going to need to think about different ways to measure success in the call center. And if we think more about that from a customer engagement standpoint, did the agent show empathy? Did the agent help the customer not only satisfy their concern, but also introduce them to new opportunities to prevent that from happening in the future. Just little, different tweaks to that, and systems and tools that are customer centric and customer focused and less about the billing have the tools and the services to do that, to guide an agent through those conversations, to capture that information that will help create more predictive solutions in the future for that customer, to predict their emotion when they get on the phone so the agent's ready. And I think that's what, that's what I'm seeing utilities are engaging with.
So James and Rupali, 1 minute each, technology investments that you're seeing. We're starting to run almost out of time here, so.
Yeah, I'll be super quick. I think in addition to that, I think we've talked a lot about what are the platforms and technology we can use internally to understand our customer better, like the 360. Customer 360 and some of the omni-channel platforms. But I think there's something to be said about the calculators and the tools that we can provide to customers so that they can run analysis on their data. James talked about the rate comparison report that he got for time of use, but can we do some bill forecasting out 2 years, especially for our commercial customers? As rates change, they need to have budgets in place, and as we're changing how the energy is being calculated versus the infrastructure charges and fixed fees, how can they start to plan for and estimate their bills? So I think the more tools and calculators we can put online for our customers, I think will go a long way.
I would say at the heart of it is building that customer 360. And then as you're building that, starting to really take advantage of it. And that's everything from predictive analytics, machine learning, leveraging robotic process automation. I think I'm seeing a lot of investment in voice of the customer. So going from kind of very basic surveys to being able to collect customer feedback across more channels and more touch points with the customers, as well as what are often called attitudinal surveys. What else? Definitely marketing and communications. Usually very poor in CIS platforms. So yeah, those areas seeing, I have a general theory that spend has gone from back office to billing systems, and now we're spending at the interaction with the customer, and that's what I'm seeing in the industry.
Excellent. Well, we are done with our conversation for today. Thank you so much to our panelists. And if you have questions that were not answered, we will email those answers back out to you. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to TJ.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, panel. Fantastic presentation today. We'd like to thank Salesforce for sure for sponsoring today's event, making it possible, and also to you folks at Utility 2030 for helping pull us all together. So for our audience, we hope you have enjoyed today's discussion as I have. As you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey and give us your feedback so we can continue to provide you with quality content. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, panelists, for presenting today. And this concludes today's presentation.